Hello and welcome back to Charm English Pod. My name is Maggie and I am an English teacher from the United States. Today's topic is Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. And this is a great topic, I think, for practicing your listening, learning new vocabulary, because we'll be talking a little bit about history, a little bit about food, customs, a lot of different things, and also to learn about history, because the historical context of a country gives you a good insight about the way that people think. And when we're learning a new language, we're not only learning the words of that language, we're also learning a new way of expressing yourself, seeing the world. And culture is a great connection to make with language. So I always think it's great to learn more about countries that speak the language that you're learning. And I don't find that with a lot of Thanksgiving materials, they give enough information or context about anything. So that's why I'm taking it upon myself to make this video. So hopefully it's helpful for you. We're going to talk about the history and kind of what Thanksgiving is, where it came from, how people celebrate it, and I'll also mention my own thoughts and how I celebrate it myself. Without further ado, here is the episode. Starting with the basics, Thanksgiving is a national holiday celebrated in the United States and also in Canada, but we have two different Thanksgivings. So the Canadian Thanksgiving is in October, and the United States Thanksgiving is the fourth Thursday of November. I usually just think of it as the last Thursday in November. I think that's easier. And this is a holiday dedicated to giving thanks, expressing gratitude, eating a lot of food, and celebrating with your family. A lot of holidays in the US especially are very commercialized, but Thanksgiving is really one of the major holidays that we continue to celebrate that's a bit more family-oriented. And if you've lived in the US, you might notice that a lot of people don't live close to their family compared to in some other countries. And this is also a very common day where you go back from wherever you're living and spend time with your family and your extended family. Growing up, I really did not see my extended family very much. It was pretty much with a lot of relatives maximum once a year. So Thanksgiving is a very important day for this reason. It was kind of like the day that I would see my aunt or my grandparents, for example. Thanksgiving also has interesting origins. So you might notice it's not really celebrated in any other country the way that Christmas is a Christian holiday. So everyone celebrates, not everyone, but a lot of people celebrate Christmas because Christianity exists in a lot of different countries. Thanksgiving is particular. It's very specific to the United States and Canada because the origin of this holiday is our colonial history. So that's the reason it's celebrated in the US and Canada, but not in a universal way in other countries, the way that some holidays are. So part of the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place is because I'm often disappointed with the materials that teach about Thanksgiving. There is this kind of fairy tale story about the origin of Thanksgiving that talks about how the British settlers, the colonizers that first came to the United States from England, we also call them pilgrims, they came to what is now the United States, specifically Massachusetts, and they faced a lot of difficulty in their first year. This was 1620. And because of that, they really needed help. And the nice version of the story is that the very nice Indigenous people, the Wampanoag tribe, came in, and out of the kindness of their hearts, they helped the pilgrims and helped them plant food for the harvest. And everyone got together after the successful harvest and had this beautiful meal together, which is Thanksgiving dinner. And that's why everyone is so thankful on Thanksgiving. Now, I will say it's possible that there was a meal shared by people, but it did not happen exactly in this kind of fictional version of the story. There is some very important context missing here in this story. The first important thing to know is that this group of people, the Wampanoag tribe, had been living in what is now the United States for thousands of years. They were very knowledgeable about farming, hunting, and really knew everything there is to know about the land because that's where they had been living. But before the Mayflower, the ship that brought this group of pilgrims in 1620 to the shores of Massachusetts, before they arrived, there were other European settlers that had come to the Americas and spread diseases, specifically smallpox. And smallpox is a disease that the Europeans brought that was never seen before by the Wampanoag tribe. And so a lot of people in this tribe and other neighboring tribes were dying at really alarming rates. So that's one important thing to keep in mind. Another important thing is that the Wampanoag tribe is not the only tribe that was living in the United States. And so now, well, the now United States. So because of that, it's important to recognize that it was not all Native Americans versus the Pilgrims. In fact, there were other neighboring tribes that had conflict with the Wampanoag. And in reality, the Wampanoag approaching the British and saying, maybe we can have a treaty or some sort of peace between us was probably not just, let's all be friends and help these guys who are here starving. It was probably more strategic. For example, these pilgrims have some weapons and we think that this other tribe might invade us, so we're going to try to get ahead of it and have some kind of relationship with them. So that's probably more of what realistically happened. It wasn't just, let's all be friends together. It was a little bit more strategic than that. It's also important to note that I've seen some historians say that the settlers were likely digging up corn and stealing from the Wampanoag tribe. So it wasn't just like they gave them all of this food. It's possible they did extend some sort of help, but really it looks like the settlers were also potentially stealing from the Wampanoag tribe. The first Thanksgiving that we think about with this origin story was in autumn of 1621, when the Pilgrims finally had their first successful harvest and were celebrating really loudly and even had guns. And nearby, the Wampanoag tribe and Massasoit heard this noise and thought that there was some sort of attack. And because they have these defense treaties and they're aware of a potential conflict with a neighboring tribe, 90 Wampanoag men show up at the settlement where the British were celebrating their victorious harvest, ready to potentially fight, not really sure what was going to happen. And when they saw that there was a celebration, these men also participated and went and killed 5 deer to eat venison meat together with the Pilgrims. And this was a 3-day celebration celebrating the harvest. And that's kind of what has turned into our idea of Thanksgiving, which to note is a little bit funny because at the time, Thanksgiving was a concept, But for the Pilgrims, Thanksgiving was more about prayer and fasting. So, like, not eating and just thinking about God and saying thanks. And so they would not have considered this first meal of Thanksgiving. It wasn't until years later that it became known as a Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, the treaty between the Wampanoag people and the settlers only really lasted while Massasoit, the Wampanoag leader, was alive. When he died, there was a lot of growing tension between the Pilgrims and the Indigenous people because the Pilgrims continued to expand their territory and take new land, steal, take people captive, try to convert people. There were a lot of other conflicts that happened until 1675, which started King Philip's War. And that was a big war between Indigenous people and the Pilgrims, which led to a lot of destruction and death on both sides, but certainly for the Wampanoag tribe and for the Indigenous people. So when we're thinking about Thanksgiving, like this nice day of peace, it did not really continue to be that way, even though perhaps people were technically sharing food for those 3 days. That didn't really continue much longer after that. In the 17th and 18th centuries, so after this, different colonies in New England, which is the Northeast United States, continued to have periodic days of Thanksgiving to celebrate military victories or successful harvests, not really connecting it with this initial Thanksgiving. It was more just like a custom. It wasn't until the U.S. Civil War, which is the conflict between the northern U.S. and the southern U.S., where the concept of a national Thanksgiving started to be talked about. And this is really interesting. I actually did not know about this historical figure until I started researching for this video. There was a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale, and one historian referred to her as the Oprah at the time. So I guess she was a writer and had a lot of influence. And she romanticized this idea of Thanksgiving, and she wanted to make it a national holiday. She started in like 1840, and for 17 years, she continued to write to U.S. presidents and try to lobby. To lobby is when there is a special interest group that wants to get new legislation for the government. So she was lobbying the presidents at the time in order to get a national Thanksgiving as a U.S. holiday. And she actually was able to convince Abraham Lincoln. And the idea was that Thanksgiving would be a symbol of unity because at the time, the southern United States was very anti-Thanksgiving because they didn't want to be told from the north about their regional holiday, that they had to celebrate it too. And interestingly, there were also different religious groups that just really didn't like the idea of the government telling them what to celebrate. And so that made it so that a lot of people did not want to celebrate Thanksgiving in the beginning. Also, fun fact, Sarah Josepha Hale is the person that wrote the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb whose face was white as snow. And it goes on. Also, it's important to note that she was an abolitionist, similar to Lincoln. So she was in favor of abolishing slavery, making it illegal to have slaves in the United States, which was still the case at the time. There were slaves at this time. Notably, she wrote a novel called Northwood, or A Tale of New England, and she spent pages in this novel describing a Thanksgiving dinner with roasted turkey, gravy, and savory stuffing, chicken pie, pumpkin pie, pickles, cakes, and preserves, and to drink ginger beer, currant wine, and cider. Honestly, a lot of these foods sound kind of similar to what we eat today, so that's kind of funny. But so that's this problematic dark side origin story to Thanksgiving that I think can't really be ignored when we're talking about how this whole story started because it really connects to the founding of the United States, and that's part of what we're celebrating. That being said, nowadays, a lot of people do not celebrate Thanksgiving as a patriotic holiday like the 4th of July. So the 4th of July is more USA patriotic, and Thanksgiving, I would say most people that celebrate are recognizing that there is this dark side and are not necessarily supporting that when they are showing their gratitude and eating turkey. There are some Indigenous people in the United States that instead of celebrating this Thanksgiving Day, prefer to observe a day of mourning to remember the lives that were lost, their lost traditions, and history as a people. This video was really interesting about the connection between African Americans in the United States and the food that we eat on Thanksgiving. And if you search online, Black Thanksgiving versus White Thanksgiving, or something along the lines of that, you might see different jokes or memes about this delicious, really amazing meal eaten by African Americans, and compared to white Americans, they have a lot more maybe richness to the food culture, and I think it's kind of funny, but the place that comes from is the fact that a lot of food traditions like cornbread, collard greens, and a lot of foods that are now connected with US soul food really came from African Americans, largely from the South in the United States during and after the time of slavery. So you can see a lot of importance with the history of food. And it's important to consider that for many years in the United States, while Thanksgiving was being celebrated by white people, there were enslaved African Americans that were largely doing a lot of the cooking. And this is also a dynamic that's important to note when we're talking about the history of Thanksgiving. Nowadays, Thanksgiving is really a day of gratitude and family, which are important themes for a lot of people. And that is something that you can really see celebrated on this day, despite its problematic history. Just to mention some of the foods that we eat during Thanksgiving, we have the turkey, and probably in the first Thanksgiving, they were not eating turkey, they were eating smaller fowl, so smaller birds. But the turkey is a bird that is native to the now United States. There is actually a letter that Benjamin Franklin wrote where he was criticizing the eagle as the symbol of the United States and praising the courage of the turkey. So some people have used this to say, oh, Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey to be our national bird, which he didn't explicitly say, but he was a fan of the turkey. People prepare turkey in different ways. Some people bake turkey in the oven, and others, like my dad, use a turkey fryer to fry a turkey, which honestly gives it really crispy, delicious skin. So I'm a fan of both. If you're baking a turkey, it's easier to put more things inside of the turkey, which would be called stuffing the turkey if you're putting ingredients inside. That is to stuff something. We also have a food called stuffing, and stuffing is made of vegetables, herbs, and cut up pieces of usually old bread. Some people add sausage or other ingredients to their stuffing, and Originally, the idea behind stuffing was you're using these ingredients to stuff the turkey. But so many people love stuffing, and if you just stuff a turkey, there's not that much stuffing. So many people make a separate tray of stuffing to serve so everyone can have bites of stuffing with their turkey. The common herbs that people use are sage, rosemary, thyme, parsley. These flavors are very typical to have in everything on Thanksgiving. Side note, if you're eating the stuffing separate and not inside the bird, that technically is dressing. It's called dressing instead of stuffing, but I think not that many people know that. I think a lot of people just say stuffing for everything. Then we have cranberries, and cranberries are these red, really sour berries. They were used by Indigenous people in the Americas before the arrival of the Pilgrims for things like food, medicine, and dyes. And this is an important fruit that is indigenous to North America. So it's common, for example, now I live in Chile. It's not really very easy to find cranberries here because they are from the United States. In Spanish, there's actually not even a word for cranberry. You say arándano. Arándano rojo is a cranberry. So it's different from a blueberry, but in Spanish, that's how you refer to a cranberry. Another really typical dish is mashed potatoes. Mashed potatoes definitely were not in the initial meal. They likely didn't really become common until the late 1700s at the earliest. But nowadays, mashed potatoes are a very common food to have on every table during Thanksgiving. And we cover the mashed potatoes with gravy. Gravy is made from, it's like a sauce, I guess, made from the drippings of the turkey. So, like the meat juice from the turkey. And we make a roux with flour and butter. So, it's like this thick, meaty sauce. It doesn't have any chunks in it, it's just from the liquid of the turkey. And you can cover the turkey, the stuffing, and the potatoes, everything with gravy. We serve gravy in something called a gravy boat, which is a dish specifically used to serve gravy. Then we have sweet potatoes, and sweet potatoes definitely is something that became more incorporated into Thanksgiving dinner through African American culture. So you can say yams or sweet potatoes, and this is another dish that is very common to see. Some people do both mashed potatoes and sweet potatoes. Other people do either or. And some people do marshmallows on top of their sweet potatoes, which my family never did, but honestly, it looks pretty good to me. Another interesting dish that you might see is called green bean casserole, and it was invented by someone named Dorcas Riley in 1955, and she created this recipe, which was then put on the can of Campbell's mushroom soup, which includes green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and crispy fried onions on top. So very peculiar, very interesting mix of ingredients, but that's another dish that you might see on Thanksgiving. Last but not least, we have dessert. And for dessert, it's very common to have pie. Pie is anything in this flaky, delicious crust. For example, pumpkin pie, apple pie, or pecan pie. Those are going to be the most common ones that you'll probably see for Thanksgiving. Pumpkin pie specifically uses the pumpkin, which is native to North America and had been used by the Indigenous people as well. This sort of custard pie that we make from it likely came about in the 1800s and was not the way that they prepared pumpkin during the time of the first Thanksgiving. But this is a very common dish today and probably the most iconic dessert for this season. Beyond the food, looking at the way that people celebrate Thanksgiving, it's important to remember, like I said before, this is probably the most family-oriented holiday in the entire year. Of course, we also have Christmas, and for a lot of families, this is one of the only days that they see their extended family. So that's important to remember with the context of Thanksgiving and why it continues to be celebrated the way it is and why it holds this importance. There are a lot of pop culture references to the specific fact that you might have political differences with your family. And during Thanksgiving, you're going to have to communicate with your great uncle who has a completely different political ideology from yours. And this is something referenced in Saturday Night Live skits. I've even seen podcasts that say something like how to say this at Thanksgiving, like how to introduce your gay husband to your family at Thanksgiving, or this sort of thing. And it has really developed into this common joke that at Thanksgiving, that's when we have to face people that have different political ideology from our own. And it's kind of this typical complaining about your family, but you come back every year to see them anyway. Another really popular thing that happens during Thanksgiving is Friendsgiving. Friendsgiving is the same as Thanksgiving, but instead of celebrating with your family, you celebrate with your friends. And that is a really common thing to do, especially for those who, for whatever reason, are not able to see their family. For instance, international students might meet a community of people when you're studying in the US at university, and they invite you to a Friendsgiving, which is like a potluck. A potluck means that everyone brings a different dish that they prepared, and people gather for a Thanksgiving meal amongst friends. That's always been a really fun part of Thanksgiving for me. I usually do both. I eat with my family and then I also have a Friendsgiving. So I think that is something that I also really like about this holiday. It can look differently if you're someone that doesn't have family or is not able to visit your family. You can still find people to invite you to the table for Thanksgiving. Another interesting thing about Thanksgiving is that it's a really important day for football fans, fans of United States American football, not soccer football. And this is because every year there are important football games hosted on Thanksgiving Day. There's a morning game, afternoon game, and then since around I believe 2006, there is an evening game as well. This started in 1934 when the Detroit Lions hosted the first Thanksgiving NFL football game. And this tradition has continued. It was broadcast on the radio, and now, of course, it is on TV. They paused during World War II and then picked it back up again. So you also will probably, if you're surrounded by football fans or if you're interested in American football, Thanksgiving Day is going to be an important day for football fans. There are a lot of different traditions related to Thanksgiving. Another one is the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. This is in New York City in Manhattan outside of the department store Macy's. The first one was in 1924, and this parade has taken place every year. It was first televised nationally in 1953, and now it is every year. So you could go to the parade in Manhattan if you wanted to, or you can also watch it on TV if you prefer. Another interesting and kind of bizarre tradition is called the turkey pardon. And to pardon someone is like to excuse them or forgive them. The turkey pardon consists of, every year, the President of the United States and the First Lady receiving a couple of turkeys, like one or two turkeys, and formally pardoning them, which means that instead of eating these turkeys, they send them to a petting zoo or another place where the turkey is free to live on a farm or what have you. And this turkey's life is spared. It does not need to worry about being eaten that year. This actually already happened this year with Donald Trump. He pardoned Gobble and Waddle, which are two turkeys. So if you're interested in that, you can search Trump turkey pardon. But this is an interesting tradition because allegedly it started with Abraham Lincoln, not in a formal way, but he received a turkey, and as per his son's request, he did not eat the turkey and sent it off to live on a farm. And later on, we have other cases of presidents like Ronald Reagan making a joke about pardoning a turkey, until finally George Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush, in 1989, was the first president to make the turkey pardon an official kind of ceremony, ritual part of Thanksgiving for the United States. So it's kind of a funny media thing every year that the president of the United States pardons a turkey and doesn't eat that turkey. And last but not least, related to traditions surrounding Thanksgiving, we have Black Friday. Black Friday is interesting because it has caught on in different countries. Caught on is like it's become popular. It's become widespread. So Black Friday has caught on in different countries. And really, the reason why Black Friday became such an important day for shopping is that this Friday after Thanksgiving was a day when a lot of people were not working, and it was a day of leisure because people had this day free and were approaching the Christmas holiday season. So a lot of people started shopping a lot on this Friday, and it became associated with an important day for different businesses to promote their products. It's believed that the phrase Black Friday comes from the 1960s when the Philadelphia police were describing the chaos of suburban tourists or people living outside of the city coming into Philadelphia on this day in order to shop and go to the Navy football game that was happening at the time. And this later caught on in the retail context in the 1980s. There are also just so many pop culture references to Thanksgiving. If you watch Friends, How I Met Your Mother, Modern Family, or movies like The Blind Side or Home for the Holidays, a lot of these movies and TV shows have scenes depicting Thanksgiving just because it is this really important cultural moment and kind of start to the Christmas season in the United States. And I wanted to end with this. Here is some vocabulary that might be helpful for you on Thanksgiving. We have to say grace or to say a blessing. This is another way to say that you're praying before eating your food. So some families like to hold hands at the table and bow their heads, and someone says, okay, I will say grace. And this person says something along the lines of, thank you, Father, for giving us this food, etc. Another word that you might hear is feast. A feast is a really big meal with a lot of food. So some people refer to Thanksgiving dinner as a Thanksgiving Day feast. An interesting word, so like related to the turkey, we have different verbs. We have you stuff the turkey, but another one is to carve the turkey. If you carve a turkey or a ham, you are basically cutting the meat off of the bone. If you know anything about Halloween and how people carve pumpkins, they're taking a knife and carving shapes into the pumpkins. Same idea here, except you are basically cutting meat off of the bone. You're carving the turkey. So you also might ask, who is going to carve the turkey? This is the person responsible for cutting the meat off of the bird. I'm just thinking if you go to a Thanksgiving dinner, maybe you can say, "Can you pass the salt? Hey, can you pass that?" It's this word pass is interesting because it means that you want someone to give something to you, like, "Can you pass the salt?" But if you use it as a phrasal verb, like, "I'm going to pass on turkey," it means that you're not going to eat that. So that's an interesting one. The phrasal verb use is pretty different from the single verb use. If you pass on something, it's like you say no to something. Another phrasal verb that I think is helpful is to fill up on something. So you might say, "Ooh, I don't think I can have any pumpkin pie because I filled up on turkey." Another phrase people use a lot when they're serving people is help yourself. Help yourself means take what you want, take the food. So if someone tells you, help yourself, it means they're offering you to just take the food and serve yourself. People also might say dig in. That's like start eating, because to dig is to get a shovel or make a hole in the ground. And so to dig in means to start eating your food. So if someone says dig in, it's a casual, very casual way to say, okay, let's start eating. And just to add how I celebrate Thanksgiving, I normally, when I'm in the United States, celebrate with my extended family. We rotate. Sometimes we're at my parents' house. Growing up, we went a lot to visit my aunt or my parents' friends and would be with a bigger group of people. I have my own signature dishes that I like to make. I have always been good at making the cranberries. I like to make them homemade using cinnamon and orange zest. Some people prefer the cranberries from a can, which are gelatinous and kind of taste like Jell-O, which are also good, but I like to make them homemade. And now that I live in Chile, I continue to celebrate Thanksgiving with my husband. He did not grow up in the United States, but I brought this tradition to him because it's an excuse to eat good food, and so why not? This Thanksgiving, we are preparing stuffing with bread and vegetables and stock, not with sausage, as well as baked mac and cheese, mashed potatoes, gravy, and my cranberry sauce, of course. But sometimes it's difficult for me to find cranberries. I have a little bit of a cranberry sauce that I found in Chile last year. But what I have been doing to supplement that is to make a delicious apple sauce with the similar flavor profile. Um, of course, any of you that live in a country that is not your native country, you have this problem where you have very specific ingredients for your dishes. And then when you have to make them in a different place, you have to kind of improvise. I think for dessert, we're going to do cheesecake actually instead of a baked pie. So we'll see how that turns out. I'm kind of interested to see. And what's really amazing about Thanksgiving, that a lot of people do, is a lot of us make a Thanksgiving leftover sandwich. And a Thanksgiving leftover sandwich is when you take some sort of bread and you put the different ingredients from Thanksgiving onto the bread. So you might have a sandwich with turkey, stuffing, potatoes, a little bit of cranberry sauce, whatever you want can go on the sandwich. And honestly, it sounds weird, but it's so good. And sometimes I like it just as much, if not more, than the Thanksgiving meal itself. So, don't knock it till you try it. That means don't say it's bad unless you've tried to do it before. And yeah, I think that's what we'll do for Thanksgiving this year. I'm curious if any of you are celebrating Thanksgiving. Let me know in the comments what you're going to eat. And I think that just about does it. So this was a lot of information about Thanksgiving. Hopefully it was helpful for you. I'm going to include some further links. I mentioned a couple of historians and other videos during this video. So if you're super interested in other aspects of Thanksgiving, there is a lot of information out there. Remember, if you liked this episode, please like and subscribe. I am happy to make more videos for you to practice your listening if the interest is there. And yeah, let me know if there's another topic that you'd like me to chat about. I'm happy to do so. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone, and take care. I hope you enjoy it if you're celebrating. If not, I hope you have the chance to one day.